but welcome to the Nomad Days Simple Wellness for Women live show. This is Jolene Fisher, your host, and every episode of the No Bad Day show is really meant to give you a view into the life of another woman. She'll share her story, her triumphs, and all the lessons that she's learned along the way. And my goal as your host is to bring you women that have relevant stories to really apply to your guys' lives, because I want you guys to be the hero of your own stories and take what they're sharing with you and really take it to heart and do something with it. Because these women are women of courage. They certainly are. And so I want you to be inspired by them today. And today we're talking to Heather Grover. And she is a gal that I have known for years. We met through network marketing and kind of knew each other a little bit through that vein for a while. And then we really became fast friends. And I was really a mentor to her in her early beginning years of starting in network marketing. And then she certainly has taken that and run with it in the area of coaching. So I'm going to give her a formal introduction so you guys can hear more about what she's passionate about right now. Heather is a mindset and self-leadership coach who finds deep joy in using her diverse skills set to meet people where they are and nudge the door open to exploring what it means to live from a space of true self and alignment. She transitioned into this work from her career in the health and fitness industry several years ago when she realized that this is where she can make the most powerful impact right now for people like her who are hungry for more truth, more authenticity, and more flow of power and energy in their lives. Her current obsession is learning and teaching what it means to authentically generate the energy to level up and achieve no bullshit goals.
Yes.
I recently went to her no bullshit goals workshop and it was really good. So I'm so excited for you to share today some things that you maybe want to share in that regard. But first of all, I really just want you to share your background with us and kind of give us your story.
Sure. Okay. So I will make it as concise as I can. I know with all of us, our stories are so full of so many incredible twists and turns and details. I think the fun things to know about me are I'm originally from Montana, grew up mostly in Spokane though, and graduated from high school here. And then pretty much as soon as I turned 18, booked it over to Seattle and swore I would never be back. And here I am loving living in Spokane again. But I was really into ballet and had a goal to be in the dance world professionally. And I was accepted to Cornish College of the Arts in Seattle. So that was my first foray into secondary education and had an amazing experience doing that. But I had a lot of stuff happen in my family's life that year. My sister had her son at 16, and I was really feeling the responsibility of I need to know what I'm doing with my life. And I don't know if I'm going to make a career out of this. So it felt really self-indulgent to continue with that schooling, even though I loved it, if it wasn't going to be like, this is the thing, right? So I was really feeling that pressure. And I decided, because I love to cook so much and I love to feed people, I think my like primary love language is feeding people. That's not in the book, but I'm going to add it as a sixth love language. And so I decided to go to culinary school, and I did that for a year, and then decided that I was going to get married. So I got married and focused on primarily supporting my husband at the time through his schooling and working as a vet tech. I mean, the message I'm trying to get through all of this is that I jumped around. I did not know what I was going to do with my life. And at the same time, I felt this intense pressure to figure it out. Right. So it was like everything that was right in front of me that seemed like the next right thing. I dove fully into that and ended up kind of accidentally landing in the fitness world and was in management for a long time. And then got into personal training as well as group fitness and all these different layers, health coaching and all of that. So that's where I kind of unexpectedly ended up building my career. And I loved so much about that. I ended up becoming the first certified Spartan coach, Spartan obstacle course racing in Washington. And I was really proud of that. And I loved everything that stood for. And I loved helping people through races. I got 100 first-time racers over the finish line. And that was an incredible experience. But through all of that journey, it just became more and more and more evident where I felt like I could make the most impact, like what Jolene described in my introduction. And yeah, but there's been absolutely no sense of direction to my story other than that internal feeling of just having that pull towards how can I make the greatest impact? What is it that I'm here to do? How am I here to serve the people around me? That has always been there. It's just changed form about 115 times.
I love your topic today on really building boundaries around love and relationships. And I know you'll get to that here in a little bit, but let's take you back to when you were 19 years old. I'm guessing you were 18 or 19 when you were in Cornish.
Yeah.
And your sister had a baby at 16 and you are looking at, okay, what am I doing with my life? Is it truly what I want to do? Is that about the time you would have said, okay, teenage self, if I could give you advice? If you were the mentor talking to that girl, what would you tell her now?
I love that question so much. And one of the things I love about that question right now is that my answer to that has shifted so drastically in the last year of my life. Looking back on all those years, I mean, I'm sure all of us can look back on our late teens through our 20s and have seasons that we're not terribly proud of, right? And seasons that were really beautiful growth opportunities and all of that. But I think it used to be that if I were to answer that question, I would be answering it from a space of, okay, here's the wisdom that you need to know in order to skip all of these parts of your story that aren't very pretty, right? That either hurt you or hurt other people or both, usually. Here's the way to avoid those things and kind of get where you are now faster. And what I know to be true now, this was actually a really impactful transition for me. I was in a state of deep meditation last summer in the midst of a lot of chaos and heartbreak in my personal life. And I actually encountered my younger self very literally in my mind. And I had this conversation and I kept trying to say something. It felt like there's something very important for me to impart to this younger version of myself. But the words kept catching in my throat. And finally, it was like I let this huge breath out and I just said, Heather, I don't need you to do anything differently than how you're about to do it. And it was just the biggest weight that was lifted off my shoulders because I released the shame finally. And now I feel like I have that younger version of myself that up until that point I had such a contentious relationship with. I feel like she's with me and she's whole and she's not ashamed. And so I am not ashamed. And that was transformative for me. So I love that question.
Right. I love that. If we could go back and tell our teenage selves or even our younger selves advice about our body image too, what you're going to do with your life and all the things that we would tell a young person, we would certainly talk different to that person than we talk to ourselves in our minds today, wouldn't we?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's a good way to put that into perspective for sure.
How gentle and kind we are to people we mentor. So why aren't we that way to ourselves?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And to tell yourself, I forgive you for anything you've done. And let's move on from here because the past is the past. And one thing that you taught us in the Rebel workshop that we did at Barbell Fitness Studio a couple weeks ago now. Was this, you drew this circle in the, and can you explain that a little bit? Because I love this. See, she was already.
I always have this visual aid like with me at all times.
I love this. Could you teach the audience today what this is all about? Because to me, it was an aha moment. And I have since that day taught it to a couple people because I'm just like, this makes so much sense.
Oh my gosh. I'm so happy to hear that. I love that. So this is the visual. It's very, very simple. You can draw this out for yourself. If you're listening to this and not watching the video, all it is a circle with an arrow going out from the top, from the bottom, and then from each side. So it's very simple. And this concept is not something I invented. This has been around for a long time, in a lot of different, from a lot of different teachers. I learned it from one of my coaches, Bill Tierney, who's actually local to Spokane as well. And it's been called a lot of different things. So the circle of influence, the circle of power, circle of truth. I just call it the circle because I like to keep it simple. And my clients know what I mean all the time when I'm saying, are you in your circle or are you out of your circle? Where are you standing right now, right? So this is the concept, is that inside the circle is you right now in this moment. And just being able to, first of all, grasp that that is really the only place where we have power, is myself right now. That is where I have true power, right? Where I can actually have influence. And outside of this circle is the business of the future, the business of the past, the business of other people, and the business of things outside of our control. So I often use the word source. You can use God, the universe, chaos, whatever is true for you, right? But things outside of our control. And so the concept here is that from inside this space, this is where we truly have influence. And when we are operating outside of it, we're disempowered. And that doesn't mean that as human beings, we're not going to get outside of it, right? We get into other people's business all the time, but do we choose from there? Am I choosing from someone else's business, or am I coming home to myself, to my truth, to my connection to source and my alignment when I choose? And so that is the power of the circle. And that is the most simple way of describing it. But it's, as you know, Jolene, very in depth, and there's a lot of layers to it. And that sounds so easy, but getting back into that circle can be really challenging, and staying there more and more of the time takes a lot of support and a lot of willingness to grow and face the things that feel like they're throwing us out of it. Even though we always have choice in that, right? Mm-hmm. But there's certain things that come up where it feels like someone picked us up out of that circle and chucked us in another direction, right? And that is part of the human experience.
I was talking to a friend, just to kind of put this into another conversation I had after your talk, and she said, quit borrowing from tomorrow's troubles.
Yes. Oh, so good.
Oh, that's good. I like that one, because if you think too much into the future and you're worried about what's going to happen in the future, then you're borrowing from the potential trouble or whatever you're trying to plan for that you don't necessarily have control over. And
exactly.
Or borrow from the troubles of the past, right? Don't bring it forward.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a difference between being led by a vision for your future and being in the business of the future, right? Like, where are you standing when you choose? And I think what I love to help bring people back to is it's not ever about what we're doing or how we're showing up necessarily, but where are we standing, right? So like, you can take the same action and do it from inside that circle of power and truth for yourself. You can do that in an aligned way, or you can do that in a really misaligned way outside of that circle from disempowerment. And that makes all the difference in terms of what experience you're going to have in your life and what kind of results you're getting.
Right. Now, talk to us about this bullshit goal thing. What is a bullshit goal and what isn't a bullshit goal? Teach us a little bit about your concept there.
That's such a good question. Okay. Well, this ties perfectly into what we're talking about with the circle, because a no bullshit goal lives inside here. A bullshit goal lives somewhere out here, right? So I think a lot of times we borrow from what is true for other people, or how we think things should or shouldn't be. So anytime the word should or shouldn't is in the language, I know, like, that's a red flag. We've got to dig a little bit deeper and find what's really true for you there, right? And so that's the biggest piece. That's kind of what that comes down to in terms of being able to find what's true for you and peel back the layers and make sure that you're coming from that space and not from fear of repeating the past, anxiety about the future, trying to control things that aren't really in your control, or what other people are going to think of you, or trying to influence how other people interact with you, that type of stuff.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about some of your story. Let's go into you a little bit more. And
this talk is about where I get nervous.
I want you to talk about the years of your life that have really shaped you into the person that you are today. What is it that you've seen and done and really been around that just says, okay, I'm going to do something about this circumstance or
Yes.
this part of my life, and it's really shaped me.
Yes. Okay. So, as you know, the last year of my life has been heavily impactful. And I can look back on so much and see how those were turning points. And you know how you have those points in your life where it's like a dividing line. There's before that happened and after that happened. And there was definitely a shift in that space, right? And so there's been quite a few of those, I feel like, over the years, but this last year is definitely the most fresh. And this is one of the beautiful layers to this concept that of the circle that I finally understood for the first time in this last year. And that was around the topic of boundaries. And, Brene Brown is really popular now. She talks about boundaries a lot. And I thought I understood it. I've been following her for years. I've loved this concept for years. I like the intensity of it. But I didn't get it. I really didn't until this past year when I really had to face my own heartbreak, really, and then figure out what it meant to set true boundaries, right? Not bullshit boundaries. So that's one of the pieces here is in order to stay inside this space, you have to have boundaries. In order to operate from this space, you have to have boundaries. Otherwise, you are going to feel like you're getting yanked out all over the place. And for me, that showed up in my closest relationships, right? That's often where it does. And it's tricky to talk about because for me, I think a lot of times when conversations happen around boundaries, it's like when we put up a hard wall and that person is no longer in our life or that experience is no longer in our life and we've moved on. But for me, the most beautiful boundaries that I've been able to set up are with people who I still love dearly and who I'm still very close to and intimate with. So there's an aspect of that where I feel nervous about sharing a lot of detail about those stories because it's not just my story. And at the same time, I know that this is so important for us to tell the truth about our lives so that other women, maybe some of you listening or watching this, know that you're not alone in your experience. So for me, my husband and I, after just getting married in 2018, we'd been together for almost 8 years. So I really thought we got a free pass on the first year of marriage being the hardest, right? I was like, oh no, nothing's really going to change. It's all good. And then life came in and was like, that's cute. Here you go, right? And it was just one thing after another. And he and I, we really hadn't built a very solid foundation for our relationship. We loved each other very much. We have a son together whom we adore, and we really respect each other as parents, but we didn't have a very strong foundation. And that became very evident when all of those circumstances just disintegrated around us, right? And put us both into these really tight, pressured spots, right? Where we were just reactive. And for him, it showed up in him really disintegrating into depression and into some really dark places. And for me, I did what I always do, which is kind of shut down a part of myself and then just blaze ahead. Like, here's what has to get done. Here's what we're going to do. And I felt myself disconnecting from my own truth throughout that year. It's hard to describe, but it's like I was running circles around this circle, right? I was never standing here. And it was so painful. And it finally culminated in a situation where for my husband and I, it was like, you have to go figure this. You need to figure this out for yourself for a while. There needs to be a boundary here because the hurt that's being caused for me and for our son is too much. And I am going to put a boundary up here. And this is a hard thing, you guys, about brave boundaries is that when you make them from a space of truth and love, you don't get to control how other people are going to react to it. And that was the hardest part for me, was releasing the outcome. So in the past, before I understood the things that I learned with the help of coaches, therapists, I had a lot of support. I don't want to make it sound like I just did this on my own. In the past, I would have put up that boundary and said, you need to go for a while. We need space. out of an attempt to manipulate him. I would have been trying to get him to change his behavior. And that would have been my intention. And that's why I say it's not what you do, but where you stand when you do it. Because what was different this time is I just knew that in order for me to show up in love for myself and for my son and for him, in order for me to not just disintegrate into resentment and frustration, I needed physical space at that point with where things had gone. And he did not react well to that, which he would be the first person to admit. And it ended up in a really heartbreaking, scary situation where we actually had a court-ordered no contact order in place for almost 2 months. And we had a boundary put up that was outside of both of our control, where it was no contact at all. And I was a single mom for a little while and had to really, really face my own truth and take responsibility for my own experience through all of that. And what I can tell you about it now, being on the other side of a lot of that, is that when I finally was able to put up a true boundary out of love and not out of manipulation or resentment, that was the turning point that made it possible for us to even have a future together. We would have kept going down the same path had I not done that. Now, asterisks here. I didn't know that at the time. I had no idea that what I was doing in that moment was actually what was going to give us hope in the future. It felt like what I was doing was finally letting go and saying, I'm willing for this to not work. For the first time in our relationship, I'm actually willing to let go and let you take responsibility for you and me take responsibility for me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Don't you feel like this is true in a lot of people's stories where change actually starts to occur for the better, that there's a rock bottom?
Absolutely. And everybody's rock bottom looks different,
right.
You know? And had I gone into that saying, okay, clearly you need to hit rock bottom so you can finally make a change, and I'd been trying to push him there, that would have been disastrous for one or both of us, right? But because I was truly coming at it from my own business only and saying, okay, this hurts and I don't want to do this, but I know that this is necessary in order for me to take care of myself and to show up within my power and in love, then it changes it, even if the action was the same, right?
Right. To drop all the stigmas of separation and divorce or all those things,
Yes.
and allow that to
Yes.
actually enter your life if it was necessary.
Exactly.
And let go of the outcome.
That's it. Releasing the outcome it can be a tricky concept to grasp, but that was so key to that whole experience. And because a lot of you don't probably know me or my story now, you know, we ultimately decided in the fall, that a few months after all this happened, to try to reconcile and to just kind of see where it went with building a new relationship and connection. And even then, I had a really powerful a session with one of my coaches where I realized that I was getting so triggered and stressed whenever he would behave in a way that was all reminiscent of how he was last year, right? It's like I would see it and I'm like, oh, no, we're not going back there. And I was so afraid, because the story I was telling myself, this is a beautiful question to ask. What is the story I'm telling myself? The story I was telling myself is, if we don't work out now, after all of that drama, right? And my family was involved, my friends were involved, right? And we chose to reconcile. And now if our relationship doesn't work, that's worse than if I had just followed through with divorce in the summer, right? And if I had just taken that legal separation and turned it into a divorce, I should have just kept going down that path. Because now that we've decided to reconcile, it has to work. And once again, I had to release the outcome. And I had to say, I am okay with this working or not working, because everything we're going through is helping us evolve as people into more love and more connection. And I know that we are better for this relationship, no matter what the outcome is. And so I had to do it again. And I'm guessing I'm going to have to do it again, right?
That is so brave, Heather.
Thank you.
You say brave boundaries, and yes, you're one brave woman to walk that path over and over again, when a lot of people would choose to not understand it or not seek counselors or therapists or coaches or all those things. And so I love that you are a coach, yet you need help too. And you don't rely on your own understanding, but that you rely on whatever it is you can rely on outside of therapists and coaches as well, whether that be God or your source, your truth, and other people's, and you take from all that and you learn from it and apply it. So tell us a little bit more about the manipulation thing, because I think that's something that a lot of, at least I did do sometimes. The whole passive aggressive word came into my head as well.
Oh yeah.
And how we like to manipulate relationships to go in the direction we want them to go in, and how that doesn't work. So can you talk to that a little bit?
Oh my gosh, that's so good. And I mean, this is one of those pieces when I say I think back on my younger self and used to feel a lot of shame, because I could look back and be like, oh, you were a master manipulator, you know? And I think it's one of those things where what I've experienced in working intimately with people and doing this kind of work is that our superpower can also be our absolute downfall, our Achilles heel, our kryptonite, whatever you want to call it. It just depends on like what direction we point it, right? And that's how I feel boundaries are. Boundaries can either be manipulation when it's in the form of things like, I think a lot of times people think of the word ultimatum too. And it can come from that space, or it can come from that true centered self. And then it's a true boundary. So the way that I call myself out on this is asking, where am I standing, right? Which is coming back to that circle. Where am I standing? Am I in the business of someone else? Am I trying to control their behavior? Am I in the business of the future, trying to get a very specific result? Am I in the business of the past, trying to avoid repeating a past that was painful? Where am I standing? And we're all human beings, so we're going to reference out to these things. We're not immune to that, right? But can I come back in here? Can I come back into that centered, connected, empowered space and choose my behavior, choose how I'm going to show up from there? So that's really the difference. If that makes sense.
Yes. Right? And how do we take accountability for what we've been doing and move forward in a place of love and acceptance of who we are right now? What are appropriate ways to take accountability with the ones around us or with ourselves?
Oh, this is so good. So I think a lot of times we resist taking responsibility or accountability for our past behaviors because there's shame attached to it, right? And so we resist that so hard because we're like, I don't want to go into that space of feeling that disgusting shame all over myself, right? So I'm just not going there at all. And to be able to look back on your past self, even if it was yesterday or 15 minutes ago, and look at yourself and say, okay, I see why you are doing that. I understand. And, right? Like, yes, I accept that that's how you showed up in the best way you could then. And we can choose differently, right? I'm a huge believer in the language of abundance of yes and instead of either or. So it's not either I was wrong then and I'm right now. It was, yes, I did the best I could at the time and I know better now, so I do better. So I think that's an important piece, is being able to release that shame. And that is not a simple thing to do. So I think having guidance, I shouldn't say that, it can be a simple thing to do, but you can need a lot of support. I needed a lot of support in order to release shame. It was so many layers deep, and it still comes up, but now I see it and now I understand what it is. There's a story that I love that illustrates this from someone I respect and use a lot of her work, Byron Katie. And she has a book called Loving What Is that is magical, but it took me 4 years to read because I resisted it.
It is an amazing book.
Isn't it? Yeah.
Every time I'm going through something hard, I'll re-listen to it on Audible because I'm like,
so good.
Okay. Yeah. Put myself back into the driver's seat here and realize where I'm like showing up. How I'm showing up is what I'm creating here in my life. So yeah.
Oh, it's so good. But I had so much resistance to it. Oh my gosh. It took me so long to read it the first time. And now it looks like it's 100 years old because I go back to it over and over. It's so beat up. But one of her stories is about how she used to take these walks in the desert, and her family was always telling her, stop walking alone in the desert. You're going to get bitten by a snake and we're going to find your body out there someday, you know. And they kept telling her this, but she loved her walks in the desert, so she kept doing it. And one day she came up on a little, you know, desert tree bush thing, and underneath it she sees a big coiled snake, and she stopped, and immediately, you know, the fight or flight adrenaline goes all through her body, and she's terrified, and her mind is telling her, like, this is it. This is the moment they've been telling you was going to happen. You're going to get bitten by the snake and you're going to die in the desert. And once she calmed her nervous system down and looked at it again, she realized it was a coiled piece of rope. And there's a couple of interesting things to analyze about that story, but the one point I love that she comes back to again and again is she could never look back at that rope, no matter how much she tried to artificially work herself up or imagine that it was a snake or anything. She could never look back at it and believe it was a snake again, because she knew it was a rope. And I think that is one of the most beautiful, freeing things about doing this kind of work, is that once we see the truth for ourselves, we can't see it any other way ever again. So it's not like an exhausting process that you have to keep coming back to over and over again. It's just so liberating, and you're able to release yourself of some of those pieces that are holding you back from showing up the way you want to show up, and from releasing the need to manipulate. Like, what is it that you're afraid of? What is going to happen? What is it that you're afraid is going to happen if you don't show up that way?
Right.
You know? So, yeah.
I think that another book that, well, so let me reiterate what the book was, because Monica asked, what is the name of the book? I put it in the text feed so you guys have it, but Perfect. Loving What Is by Byron Katie.
Yeah.
And she's, I guess, come out with another book. So I'm excited to look into that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm excited. And I do, if you're an Audible person, if you like listening to books, that is a great one to listen to on audio, because you can hear her do the work in a way that is more like it's live. And I think it's really effective to hear it as well as read it.
Yes.
So
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. I bought the book after I got Audible because I needed it as a reference, but
yeah, exactly. I have them the same. I have both. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. The other book I was going to mention was The Four Agreements.
Yeah.
And the Four Agreements, one of them is to not make assumptions. And it's kind of like what we're talking about right now.
Yeah.
That we can't walk into a situation with someone or look at a situation as a whole and make an assumption about it, which is usually wrong, before we know the truth. And so talk to us about getting to the truth of the matter with people and understanding how we view them and the circumstances around the situation. But what is a loving way to get to the truth when we go into something making an assumption and we're all fired up and
Oh yeah. Oh, I've been having so many great. Okay, so I'll keep it relatively clean, but I like to call it. I got this from I believe it was Glennon Doyle Melton in her book Love Warrior. It's AFGO, AFGO, another effing growth opportunity. Sometimes when you have to have a sense of humor about those things that come into your life. And this week I've had several of them where I got all heated up, like you're talking about, right? And making assumptions and things like that. And I had to come back to that space of being in my circle, in my truth, and showing up in love. And so there's two questions that I love asking that I think take me back to that space quicker than anything. And the first one is, what is the story I'm telling myself? So I mentioned that earlier, and just answering it honestly, right? Like, don't filter it. If you're a writer, write your answer. If you're just a thinker and you want to just process that in your own mind, do it. But really ask that question and answer it. What is the story I'm telling myself about this situation? And follow it all the way through. Don't cut it short. Say everything that you're telling yourself about it without judgment. And then the other question, which is similar but kind of a different angle, is what am I making it mean? Right? So asking yourself, what am I making this mean? There's two pieces to both of these questions that I love. One is that you're automatically taking your power back because you're taking responsibility for your own experience, right? It's my story. It's what I'm making it mean, right? And I have the power to shift that if I want to, if I choose to. And it also allows us to understand that the reality that what we're experiencing is completely dependent on our own reference points, right? It may or may not be true about the other person's intentions. It may not be true about the circumstance. But what matters is what we make it mean. And then when we can shift our energy there, we can actually come up with, okay, what is the boundary here? Or how do I want to show up in this situation from love? And it allows us to get curious about it. Curiosity is a superpower, absolute superpower. And when we're in judgment, it's mutually exclusive with curiosity. We cannot be in both spaces at the same time. So those two questions help me shift even just a little bit out of judgment and into curiosity.
I love that. Yeah, just thinking of my own experiences in getting fired up about something or someone, and being inquisitive about what truly is going on, and then understanding ultimately that I'm making it about myself.
Yeah. Oh,
and
yeah.
Some hurt that I'm feeling or fear I'm having as a result of it. And so ultimately, when I'm answering these questions, I'm like, I'm making this about me.
Yeah. And you know what? And that's okay, because also congratulations, Jolene, you're a human being and you have a human brain that is doing its job, right? So like the point of that, I think sometimes people kind of shrink away from the idea of like radical responsibility and, I'm making this about myself, because we assume that that's attached to shame, and it's not, right? That's a whole other story we're telling ourselves. Taking responsibility for, hey, guess what? Your brain is a meaning making machine. That is what it is supposed to do, right? But there's something that's even deeper and truer and more connected and more aligned. And that goes beyond what your brain is making things mean, right?
Right. Well, I want to bring this back around to brave boundaries and love and relationships, and what you tell people. What is your advice as a coach I know that's a loaded question, but we've talked about a lot of things, but I want to bring it into your strategy of coaching on boundaries. What is it that you like to tell people to do, basically?
Yeah.
How do they approach it?
Oh, this is so good. So guiding people through that work specifically is probably the majority of what I spend my time coaching on currently. And the most important thing to know, well, I don't know if it's the most important thing, but one of the really important things to know about that is that it's not going to look the same for everyone. So it's definitely not a situation where someone presents a relationship dynamic to me that's really broken and is like, okay, what do I do? And I'm like, all right, here's the steps, right? It's more about going through the process of doing the work, peeling back the layers, looking at what is the story I'm telling myself? What am I making this mean? What am I afraid of? What am I clinging to? What details am I not willing to release, right? Things like that. And as we explore that, what I find to be so important about coaching work is that you as the client are always the expert on your own life, and you have deep wisdom inside yourself that maybe you just haven't accessed before. So my job is to just guide you to that truth within yourself, not to give you an answer. So that is a bit of a non-answer to your question.
No, that's good though. I think that I like what you said about the inner wisdom. I recently had a coaching client of mine who has a lot of ailments, a lot of medical issues. And I said, you've seen multiple doctors and they've told you all these things for years. You've never felt good, like maybe going on 10 years. Yeah. And you've never been able to release this weight that you wanted to release. What is your inner wisdom telling you this is all about?
Ooh,
and she's never asked herself that question before. I was like, I've always relied on doctors to tell me, or I've always relied on whatever to tell me, but what are you telling yourself? And are you really looking inward for the answers, or praying about it, or meditating on that, and really becoming clear on your truth?
Yes. And it comes back to deeply held fears and belief systems that have been ingrained in us from a very young age. And it can be different for each of us, but a lot of them come back to the same type of beliefs. I'm not enough. I'm not worthy of love and belonging, things like that, where at some point that idea was put in our head, and then we built a belief system around it. And that belief system is running our thoughts without our consent now as adults. And so being able to go back and find another story that is at least equally true, if not more true, right? Because I think sometimes when it comes to the concept of self-love and acceptance, that can become almost like another thing we're failing at as women, right? Like,
right.
Take care of yourself, love yourself, on and on and on. And it almost becomes this other thing that we're supposed to do in order to be a whole person as a woman that we're failing at doing also, right? And so, it takes really digging in and getting to allowing what's been true for you so far to be there, and building a belief around a new story, right? That is empowering.
Right. I find that stress is probably the number one thing that's keeping women from losing weight or actually feeling their 100% best, because ultimately stress causes inflammation, and inflammation causes disease, right?
Exactly.
And we hold on to things. But just as powerful as stress is, the belief structure we're operating out of is just as powerful, like Heather was saying. So the belief operating system you're working from is running your subconscious show, whether or not you like it.
Yeah.
And that's, again, you have to go back to that subconscious programming and rewrite the story in a way.
Absolutely.
Or believe in something. I love that's equally as true. That's a better belief.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I love that Brene Brown talks about how her husband, when she was exploring in her research, the idea of, are people really doing the best they can, right? And I relate to her in a lot of ways. I think we have some similarities in personality, and she really struggled with that, right? And I've struggled with that too. Like, I can believe that in general, and then I think about certain situations, certain people, even myself at certain times, and I'm like, no, I think they could have done better. I think I could have done better, right? But what her husband said was, I have no idea. I have no way to know. I just know that I like who I am better when I choose to believe that people are doing the best they can. And I found that to be really true in doing our own work on ourselves as well, is that if we can give ourselves permission to just believe that, yes, I was doing the best I can, and when I know better, I do better, it's just such a weight off. And we're so much more empowered and so much more capable. And shame only generates more of the same, right? It just never takes us anywhere else but right back to it.
Right. And that's living out of a conscious state, knowing and every day I'm consciously living, not subconsciously living, because the subconscious operates 90% of our operating system. I was driving today and thinking really hard, and I'm like, who's driving this car right now? Obviously my subconscious brain, because I've been driving a car for how many years, but I'm like, think about it, how often we operate throughout the day without really thinking and doing. And then when we do think, okay, conscious brain, take over, am I doing my best in the situation that I have presented to me right now? And that could just be, if I'm watching my daughter's basketball game, that I'm present watching the game because I'm there, not on my phone, not working, that I am present. And so, or if I'm about to eat a bag of chips, I'm like, am I doing the best with the goals that I had set for myself? Do I have goals and vision for what I want? Yeah. So that's good. Yes. And part of one of the 4 agreements, again, going back to that book, is doing your best. That's one of the 4 agreements. Do your best.
Yeah. And I love, so I started exploring this question with food, because this was back when I was more in like the health and fitness world, which is, instead of asking, what do I want to eat? Or even worse, what should I eat? Right? Asking, how do I want to feel after I eat? Emotionally and physically. And I would say also spiritually, like on every layer, how do I want to feel after I eat? And now I've started to apply that to so many things, right? When I'm in a moment of conflict with someone, to be able to say, okay, at some point I'm going to be past this conflict. How do I want to feel afterwards? Right? How do I want to feel about myself and how I showed up? How do I want to feel about this person? Right? And how can I How can I choose from that space instead of being reactive in the moment, which is the same way we can be with food. And that doesn't always mean that I make the most ultimate, like, perfect example, quote unquote, healthy choice about food. Sometimes the honest answer to that is biscuits and gravy. Yes, please. Right? Like, if my grandma just made me biscuits and gravy, you better believe that the best thing that's going to feel good after eating that is eating that biscuits and gravy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I love it. There's so much of a social aspect around food. And so that's great, because I believe you're laughing, you're having fun, and things are all good. Those calories don't even count.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But I love what you're saying there, that if we come from a different place when we approach anything, right? Like exactly what you just said, just approach it differently without the shoulds. And
yes,
I love it.
I had a really interesting experience with this when it comes to boundaries, not to the other, but to myself when it comes to alcohol. Because I hit a point in my life, gosh, I'm trying to even remember. It was about 4 years ago, probably, where I was really frustrated with the way that alcohol was affecting some of my relationships because of other people's choices with alcohol. And I just was so fed up with it. And I decided I am going to be the example of the fact that it is possible to live a full, happy, fun-loving life without alcohol. And I was like on a mission, right? And I wanted to be the example. And it's not that there's anything wrong with that, quote unquote, but here's the thing. I was coming from someone else's business, right? Like, I was really wanting to, on some level, manipulate and get someone else's behavior to change by making that decision. And so I did it. I stopped drinking. But I would do things like, we'd be at a restaurant and the server would come around and ask whatever wants to drink. And instead of just saying, I'm great, I'm good with water, thanks, I would say, oh no, I don't drink, right? Because I'm making a point all the time, right? Oh no, I don't drink. And I had to bring attention to it all the time. And this led to some very awkward interactions, including one server like saying, oh my gosh, you've got to come to this meeting on Tuesday just down the street, right? Like, and then me feeling like, oh no, I'm not an alcoholic. I just choose not to drink, and then feeling like a giant jerk and just making a whole mess of it, right? But I was coming from, it wasn't the choice I was making, it was where I stood when I made it. And eventually I was able to shift that. I was able to disintegrate, or not disintegrate, but to dissect out where the boundaries needed to be in relationships around alcohol, and then what was true for me and myself, and allowing myself to be fluid with that. And I still don't drink to this day, but that choice is coming from a space of truly feeling like that's the best way I can take care of myself with my tendency towards anxiety and different things like that, and has nothing to do with anyone else. And that feels, oh my gosh, it feels so light. Whereas the same decision from a different space felt heavy. So
right.
That's
love that. Gosh.
Yeah.
So good. I'm doing a talk here next week for bosses, like the boss series, they call it. And one of the things I'm going to be talking about is this concept of presenteeism in the workplace. Absenteeism, we know what that means. You're absent.
Yeah.
But presenteeism means when you show up for work, but you can't be present because you feel so bad. And you want to sleep at your desk, and you just have brain fog and all this stuff. So what you're saying is feed yourself and do the things that are healthy to the body to help us show up in life in a way that is light and love and like if I can't show up at work or in my marriage or with my kids or when I sit down to write because I'm so tired because of what I ate or that I didn't get enough sleep, then we're coming from a place of not being able to have impact, or you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that's really important to know about that, and I love that concept that you're going to be teaching on, of presenteeism. One of the things is that sometimes this whole concept of the circle and everything we're talking about can be interpreted to mean, oh, I'm just going to feel, the goal is to feel good all the time, right? Like, how do I make sure I'm always going to feel good? Well, that's not part of the human experiment that we're all a part of, right? So it's possible to be deeply sad, right, from inside your circle. It's possible to be angry from inside your circle. It's possible to have uncomfortable emotions from inside that space. It's not necessarily about it feeling amazing all the time. Some of the most empowering experiences I've ever had, especially in the last year, have felt terrible at the time. And yet, at the same time that it felt terrible, it felt, I'm trying to think of a word that encapsulates it, but I guess empowering is what I would say, is just that I was owning my experience and allowing my experience to be true.
We have a question from the audience.
Ooh, fun.
All right. So this comes from Brenya. Thank you, Brenya, for asking a question. She says, I'm kind of late to the conversation, but my biggest thing is food choices. I know it's, okay, hold on. If I make an unhealthy food choice, I know it's not good for me, but I eat it anyway. I just get so down on myself and get super disappointed for making that choice. How do I turn it around and not beat myself up so much and just be okay with it and move past it?
Oh, so good. So good. Thank you for that question. I think so many women can relate to that. And my first invitation to you would be to ask, what is the story I'm telling myself about this? Right? So you chose to eat something. You know it wasn't the thing that would best serve the goals you have for your body or whatever that may be. And you're telling yourself some kind of story around that. Like, see, it's evidence, right? Our mind is going, this is evidence towards a belief that you have. See, you're not good enough. See, you're not going to be able to do this. See, like, why are you even trying to do something different? Because you're just going to do the same thing that you always did. And it's usually colored by shame, right? So you have a story that you're telling yourself that is gathering evidence towards a deeply held belief. And until we start to dig into what that belief is, and then find something else that you believe to be true about yourself that is empowering, that is inside that circle, then you can start to interact with yourself from that space.
Okay. Brenda, do you have any follow-up questions on that? Just type it in here.
Okay. Yes. I know that was like, there aren't any like quick and easy answers, right, to these things. Because if there were, we would all have it figured out.
She said you nailed it on the head.
Ooh, okay. I love it. I'm so glad that you got what you needed out of that. That's awesome.
So I think that leads to, let's talk about this a little bit further. So we have a belief that we believe about ourselves, and that's operating how we are creating a story around it. And that leads to thoughts, right?
Yep.
Thoughts lead to feelings.
Yep.
Okay. And that feeling for her is shame.
Yes.
Or whatever she wants to call it. So Brenda, you were going to name that, right? Feeling that you have after that event. So then it goes to what next? Feeling
to an action, right?
Yeah.
And then the action gives you a result. And Jolene knows, because she was there when we did this work together, there's a beautiful exercise you can do around this, where you start to really take an honest and just simplified look at how you're getting the results you're getting, and then how to create a shift. Because for you, Brenda, when you're looking at that cycle that you're probably feeling has been repeating for a while in your life, you're at the top of that what is the word I'm looking for? Process, essentially.
She said her belief is that I'm not good enough, if you want to talk about that.
Okay. So you have a circumstance, which is that you have eaten something you feel like you shouldn't have, right? And then you have thoughts around that. And you obviously are very aware of where those thoughts come from. It comes from a belief of I'm not good enough, right? And so I'm not good enough brings all kinds of thoughts with it. Those thoughts generate a feeling of shame. I'm just going to call it that. You might have another word that feels true for you around your feeling, right? And then that feeling leads to a result. And that result is what, right? Like, what actions do you take from that space? And what we find is that our circumstances and our results will always end up aligning until we start to shift what's happening at that thought level. So a lot of times, where we focus is at the action level. Okay, I'm going to interrupt with a different action. I'm going to force myself to make another choice. I'm going to put myself into such a situation where, this is where I see people post on Facebook, and this is absolutely not a judgment if any of you have done this, because I've done this too many times. This is my goal, and this is what I'm going to do, and I'm posting it here so I'll be accountable, right? And we try to interrupt at that action level and kind of bully ourselves into doing something different. And it's not that there's there's not value in changing the action. But the problem is, if that's all we do, it's exhausting. It takes a lot of energy and willpower to keep interrupting at that level. And so as soon as the circumstances of our lives shift in a way where we don't have as much energy to pull from, then we can't make that action anymore, right? And it's okay. It's natural. That's exactly the way it's supposed to be. So instead, if we can make a model where we're looking at, okay, this is the result that I want to have in my life. This is what I want to be true for me about my experience with my body, right? And you imagine if I was already there, when I am in that space where I feel so good in my own skin, what type of thoughts am I thinking? And how do those thoughts make me feel? And when I feel that way, how do I act, right? So it's not even just saying, oh, I'm trying to get a different result. It's saying, when I have that result, how will I behave? How will I think? What is different about my belief system when I am in that space, when that circumstance is different, and operate from that energy now. So it's a little bit of a mind bender, but it's so powerful. You operate from that future self now, right? And that is how you're going to shift your results. And a piece of that is also digging into what goes in that result category. If that's a bullshit goal that is outside of your circle, then we got to evaluate that first, right? So we know it's an empowered goal, an empowered result. So
right, love it. Well, on that note, you have some workshops coming up.
I do, yes. Okay, so I have a 2-hour workshop that's on empowered habits. It's the second part of the No Bullshit Goals workshop, but it is also its own experience. You can absolutely come to it and get value from it, even if you weren't at the first one. And that's going to be at Barbell Liberty Lake coming up on February 15th from 9:30 to 11:30. And then I have 2 events that I could cry. I'm so excited about them. I'm going to be co-coaching with a dear friend of mine, Rachel Briscoe. And we are going to be leading an intimate group of women through a full day training on building brave boundaries. So excited about this. We're only going to cap it at 10 women. So we want it to be a very close, intimate group. As I said at the beginning, feeding people is my love language. So I get to make a gorgeous lunch for those of you who come. And we have one happening on February 29th and one happening on March 21st, I believe. So we're keeping those quite small on purpose, but it's going to be an amazing experience. So I'm really looking forward to those.
Heather, get me those links and I'll put it in the group.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Will do.
Okay. And where can people find you on social?
Yeah. So Heather Grover is my name. Grover is just like the Sesame Street character, little blue guy. And I have Facebook, and I'm just a regular profile. I've not been very active on my business page because I'm still trying to change the name, and Facebook doesn't like that. So they won't let me change the name. I know, it's crazy. But I'm most active on Instagram. So if you are on Instagram, that's where you can get the most interaction with me. And that's Heather Grover Wild Thing. So at Heather Grover Wild Thing, all lowercase, one big long word.
Awesome. Where'd the wild thing come from?
So this was funny. It's kind of an evolution of what my fitness business became in the last years that I was working within it and doing obstacle course racing and all of that. And we started having this kind of call out to each other of get up, get up, get up, right? And it was just this idea of you're going to fall down on your face over and over again, right? I love that man in the arena quote and that visual of like, we are in the arena, we are doing life, we are doing hard things, right? And we have to just be able to get up over and over and over again. But then it expanded into wild thing. So now I'm always saying get up, wild thing, because I love that call to just the gorgeous, both like divine and human experience of being in this life that we're living, and that it's all so intricately woven, and being able to connect back to that like really wild nature of who you are at your core, and that and what just like speaks to your soul, you know? And so that's just kind of become my personal mantra, is like get up, wild thing, right? Like kind of fun, but also exciting and motivating and Yeah. So that's it.
I love it. It brings me back to a word or a picture of myself at 2 years old with lopsided pigtails and Here Comes Trouble on her shirt and
yes,
bare feet that I could run through rocks and my mom would be chasing me. Jolene, get back here. Because she was going to give me some whooping because I was like,
yeah,
I was definitely
a
strong-willed child, which has helped me today. But
yeah.
it's funny that I love that wild thing.
That's awesome. I love, and so much, in fact, I referenced her earlier, but Glennon Doyle Melton just posted this the other day, a picture of herself as a child that she put on her desk when she was writing one of her books as a reminder back to like, remember who you came into this world as, like, right? Like that just pure and beautiful and wild child, right? And I like that quote, the two people to impress on a daily basis are your 5-year-old self and your 85-year-old self, right? And I'm really visual, so I love actually envisioning my 5-year-old self, and I love envisioning who I'm excited to be when I'm 85. And I have a very specific vision of being in a field on my property, topless on a horse with long silver hair. Like that is my 85-year-old self. Just like I don't even care. I do what I want to do, right? And
go.
yeah, I'm so excited to get older. Anyway, there's a freedom in that, right? In both of those ages, there's just kind of this freedom and this authenticity of being who we're created to be. And I truly believe this is why this work is so important to me. Who you are, Jolene, and who each of you are, the women listening to this, at your core and what is true for you is necessary in the world right now. Like your truth and your authentic self is exactly what we need. So anything that I can do to be a trail guide for you in coming home to yourself is the most important work I could be doing, because that is what we need in the world right now. That's what your babies need. That's what your relationships need. That's what our community needs. That's what our globe needs. So I am just deeply passionate about that.
That gave me the chills.
Ooh, yes.
This has been an amazing call. I'm just going to use this forever and ever with my clients too. Obviously we record these, put it on YouTube and podcasts. So you guys who are listening, you can subscribe to my podcast through Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Just look for No Bad Days, Simple Wellness for Women, and you should be able to find it. Maybe even type No Bad Days, Jolene Fisher. Either way, you'll probably get to it. And I'm still small potatoes in that arena. So sometimes the search engine isn't like, oh, #1, Jolene Fisher. But you'll find it. And
we'll get you there.
Yeah, we'll post the link to the podcast and the YouTube after I get those produced. But Heather, this is going to live on for a long time because the information in this particular talk today is timeless.
I love it.
I love that we were able to capture it in a way that we can just disseminate this out to women all the time.
I love it. Oh my gosh, it's such a privilege.
Listen to this. And then we are going to talk, right? Like,
yeah, I love it. It's such a privilege. I just thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be a part of your platform and to speak to the women in your community. I just like, and for you, Jolene, and all of you, your time and your attention is just the ultimate gift. And so I'm so honored that you would give that to me today. So thank you. It's it. I love it.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Jolene.
Welcome. Have a good day.
You too. Bye.